demise of the First International after the anarchist wing of the movement took it over. And so, you know, the Second International started in a very different period than the First International started. That's the thing you have to keep in mind. At the time of the First International, socialism, Marxism were very unpopular, small ideas. And the working class, capitalism was very, very new. But at the time the Second International was formed, capitalism had expanded to the point that the working class, there were way more workers. The Industrial Revolution was spreading all over Europe outside of England. There were factories everywhere, and there was the new working class. And capitalism had entered its first serious depression around the late 1880s. You know, capitalism, you know, you have the boom-bust depression, the cycle, you know, you hear about in the bourgeois economics, and a severe economic depression hit. In addition to that, the Kaiser in Germany banned socialism. He had the anti-socialist law, and Friedrich Engels talked about how that was the greatest gift anyone had ever given to socialism, was to ban it, because all these workers who had hated the you know, the Kaiser, Otto von Bismarck, and all these, you know, oppressive things, now found out that they had banned the socialists, and so now they were interested in what they had to say. Unionism was growing in great numbers, and in addition to that, I mean, it was a period. You also had flourishing people talking about socialism who weren't, you know, from the working class. You had these kind of intellectual movements popping up, like the Fabian Society in Britain. You had George Bernard Shaw, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, who were talking about socialism. You had novels coming out, like there was a famous novel, News from Nowhere. You know, it was kind of a socialist, kind of a diary of someone who gets transported into a socialist future. You had Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward, which was another moralistic tale about that. You had, you know, all kinds of, you know, criticism of capitalism coming to the forefront in the midst of an economic crisis. One of the intellectuals who was big in it was Jack London. And his last book he had published, he's the guy who wrote White Fang and Call of the Wild and all that. Well, his last book was called The Iron Heel, and it's about a socialist coming to office in the U.S. and taking office, and the U.S. government then dissolving, and a military dictatorship coming in to suppress the socialist revolution. The Iron Heel that comes down on the workers. But at the time, you know, at the time of Marx's death, only 10 people actually attended his funeral. That's how, you know, unpopular and isolated the Marxist movement was. The Second International was founded. One of the first things they proclaimed when they founded the Second International was that it was it was a political organization, meaning that the anarchists and the sections that believed you should never try to lobby for a law, or you should never vote, or you should never have a party, those sections were excluded by definition. They were a political international. But even when the Second International was formed, it had within it had splits, and even, you know, the founding conference was in Paris, and on the other side of town there was another convention by the people that called themselves the Possibilists, and they were the right-wingers the right-wing socialists who denounced the Second International's gathering and said that they were for a possible future, which meant that they were going to have petitions and get elected and all of that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Wouldn't a right-wing socialist be a contradiction?
Well, in the right wing of socialism. Socialism is the left wing, but you have, you know, people that are less left than other socialists, right? You have the left wing, which would be like the anarchists and anarcho-syndicalists and people, and then you have the right wing, which are kind of reformists and, you know, democratic socialists is what they call themselves nowadays, you know. So at the time, you know, this severe economic crisis, the capitalists in France did something, a common trick that capitalists do frequently, is when there's an economic crisis, instead of blaming the you know, the ruling class, they want people to redirect their anger somewhere else. And at the time, in the 1880s, one of the groups they blamed was the Jews. And there was the Dreyfus Affair, the infamous Dreyfus Affair. And that was a general in the French army who was accused of being a spy, and he was Jewish, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism. And the position within the International, there were two positions, really. One of the first positions was that they should do nothing. that, oh, you know, this anti-Semitism, it has nothing to do with the working class. You know, we're fighting for the working class. You know, Jews, what do they have to do with anything? We're only fighting for the gains of the workers. There was another section that said that the French Republic was under such threat from this anti-Semitic terror that it was necessary to align with the capitalists. And it was necessary to align with them. And the leader of the section that wanted to align with the capitalists was Miliband. And Miliband, he aligned with the French Radical Party, which was the party associated with the French Revolution, in the name of preserving the French Republic. Miliband actually took a seat in the cabinet of the Radical Party. And there was great debate about that because there was feeling, you know, that Miliband had joined a government that was at the same time breaking strikes and shooting workers, and Miliband ended up getting kicked out of the Second International on the grounds that you can't be in the same camp as the capitalists. And there was heavy objections from some people who felt that, you know, it was necessary to preserve the republic. You know, you know, this fascism, we're under severe attack, and so it's necessary to align ourselves with the liberal capitalists in the name of defeating what eventually later would become identified as fascism. And interestingly enough, also at another point, there was another section of the French section of the Second International who embraced the anti-Semitism and the attacks on Dreyfus and all that, and they denounced the International for not siding with French workers against the threat of international Jewry. And that's where, and they left the Second International, and they, you know, the first people to call themselves National Socialists were these figures who left the Second International. They had no relation to the Nazis later, but they made a point of being anti-Semitic and denouncing what they called internationalism, which was the ideology of the Second International. They were proletarian internationalists.
Well, the Nazis took only their name. They didn't have.
Yeah, and they took their name and they took some of their ideological points, but they wasn't the same people. But it was the same concept that the Nazis used. You know, we're the real, authentic socialists, the real German socialists. You know, unlike these internationalists who want a global government or some nonsense like that. Finally, the anti-socialist laws in Germany were overturned finally, and it was legal to be a socialist. And thousands of workers poured into the German Social Democratic Party. And at the time that they poured into the party, it looked as if socialism in Germany especially had its day. As thousands and thousands poured in, it was a triumph. And so there was feeling on the part of Edward Bernstein and his group of people that called themselves the revisionists. And they called themselves that. I know it's an attack that's hurled at a lot of people. They openly said, we're the revisionists, we want to revise Marx. This concept Karl Marx has that the governments of the world are merely the executive committee of the capitalists, that's false. You know, now that everyone in Germany, there's what they call universal suffrage, everyone has the right to vote, the government's just up for grabs. If we just organize a bunch of socialists together and they can, we can have our vote and we'll win and we'll get socialism through elections, and you know.
You jolly well are, aren't you?
Right, and we'll just do that. And that was Edward Bernstein's thesis. And that also one of their other points is they agreed with Miliband that it was necessary to unite with more liberal sections of the capitalists. That, you know, these sections of the capitalists that aren't so right-wing and might be open to some more socialistic concepts, let's have unity with them, and let's build up what some folks now would call a progressive majority, and we'll build socialism one step at a time. Some of these figures, you know, they talk about they have a brick wall, right? And the first brick is you know, is national health care, and the next brick is legalization of trade unions, and eventually all the bricks add up and you have socialism. The big quote from Bernstein is, the movement is everything, the aim is nothing. Meaning that it's not about socialism, it's just about, you know, winning these demands for the working class. We just have to win these demands for the working class. And that the way to do that is to recruit thousands and thousands of people into a socialist party. The Socialist Party should not really have any, you know, defining principles other than we're for socialism, and, you know, we'll gradually get elected. That was the position of Bernstein, who led the right wing of the Second International.